T.C. Lethbridge and the intolerable stench of ancient objects. Thomas Charles Lethbridge, 23rd of March 1901 to the 30th of September 1971, better known as T.C. Lethbridge, was an English archaeologist, investigator of spiritual phenomenon, and explorer. He wrote 24 books, becoming particularly well known for his explanations and research into dowsing. Lethbridge was lucky to have been born into a wealthy family. It gave him an independence of which he took advantage to good effect. At almost every stage of his career, he ignored dogma and orthodoxy and described what he had found by meticulous and unbiased observation. University. In October 1921, Lethbridge enrolled at Trinity College, Cambridge, intent on studying geology and geography. While still very young, he had developed a passion for archaeology, entomology, and ornithology, as well as drawing. He was an avid collector of fossils, skulls, bone, rocks, and in fact anything interesting. But he found the geology taught at Cambridge to be crushingly dull. He rarely attended lectures as a consequence, but despite this, he graduated with a third-class BA in June 1923. During his student years, Lethbridge frequented the Cambridge University Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology, where he had befriended its curator, Louis Clark. Upon Lethbridge's graduation, Clark offered him the honorary position of Keeper of Anglo-Saxon Antiquities at the museum. Lethbridge took up the voluntary and unpaid post, being able to subsist on his family's finances. He served as honorary keeper from 1923 to 1957. Expeditions. Lethbridge was first and foremost an adventurer, but his adventures provided him with valuable information. In 1921, Lethbridge was part of an expedition to visit Jan Mayen Island in the Arctic Circle, alongside fellow Cambridge students James Chaworth Musters and William Sire Bristow, and a Don from St John's College, Cambridge, the geologist James Wordy. In the summer of 1923, he became part of a party mostly composed of young men from Cambridge who had just taken their degrees, attempting to go to East Greenland. In a chartered Norwegian sealing ship to do some research work in what was at the time a little-known piece of country. In 1937, Lethbridge was part of an expedition to northwest Greenland to investigate cosmic radiation at high latitudes and great altitudes. He was one of a team of 10 men. Setting sail in June 1937, Lethbridge undertook excavations of Eskimo sites at Ryder Island, Carey Island, Northwest Island, and Eisborn Island. On returning home in October 1937, it was decided that various geographical features encountered would be named after team members, and thus 2 lakes on Baffin Island were named the Lethbridge Lakes. Archaeological digs. As war broke out, Lethbridge organised the transfer of much of the museum's collections to Balsham Caves for safekeeping. He also led the rescue excavation of 10 prehistoric tumuli that were being destroyed to enable the construction of Snellwell Airfield for the Royal Air Force. The 10 tumuli discovered in 1879 were situated alongside the Icknield Way, a major path that led to Bury St Edmunds and linked to Peddar's Way. Snellwell is just north of Newmarket. Lethbridge continued his archaeological investigations, excavating an Anglo-Saxon cemetery at Lackford on Cavenham Heath, for example. It is rarely mentioned, but Lethbridge discovered many of the artefacts and sites by dowsing. Note that pendulums are being used here, and the length of the pendulum is also key. T.C. Lethbridge, ESP, extrasensory perception beyond time and distance. All that we are finding out now is not really new. The facts were known to many men, in many lands, and through many ages. It is only during the last 100 years or so that they have become obscured. Men in the Stone Age apparently knew more about the real meaning of life than the most erudite professor of science today, for we were brought up and conditioned to believe that science either knew all the answers or was just about to find them. It seems clear now that a huge slice of knowledge has been left out. Lethbridge became increasingly critical of the academic and professional archaeological community, believing that an attitude of what he called trade unionism had caused most archaeologists to reject independent thought. In the end, the closed minds and hostility of the academic community wore Lethbridge down, and he resigned from the University Museum in 1957. From that point, he decided to research the area in which he had become the most interested, and became an explorer of the spiritual. The stone tape theory. As a result of his archaeological work, and also his own observations, Lethbridge came up with a theory which is now known as the stone tape theory. Hallucinations are an overlay of spiritual input from either beyond the mind or from the mind itself over the sensory input being received. When it is beyond the mind, it may come from stored perceptions of other things. In effect, although only certain objects have a memory, everything has perceptions, and it is possible to tap into those perceptions when one is in the right frame of mind. Thus the perceptions of stones in particular, or any crystalline matter, can produce a playback of some emotionally charged event. And Lethbridge came to the conclusion that ghosts and hauntings are analogous to tape recordings, and that mental impressions released during emotional or traumatic events are stored in crystalline rocks or walls and can be replayed. With this in mind, he used the gifts of a lady he calls E to delve into the histories of some objects. The experiments with E. T.C. Lethbridge, A Step in the Dark. One of the points which seemed to make the greatest impression on E when holding ancient objects was the stink of the dwellings. One does not think of this when excavating old sites, but the smell of modern Eskimo houses was more than I could bear, and I never went inside one. People in antiquity, except Greeks and Romans in the Western world, seldom washed. Although the Celts invented soap, they washed their hair with urine. When I occasionally borrowed a can of hot water on an Arctic expedition, washed and shaved, people came into the cabin and remarked, "What is that disgusting clean smell?" My old friend, Louis Clark, who ran the Cambridge Museum of Archaeology and Ethnology as a hobby, told me that he had known an old woman who as a girl had known another old woman who had been at the French court before the Revolution. Louis's friend had asked her old friend what was the chief difference between life in the Victorian era and her girlhood's days. "My dear," said the older woman, "people do not smell anymore." And of course that seemed a far greater change than any wrought by the invention of the steam engine or factories. It made the brilliant age of Louis XIV seem tawdry and unclean. A real advance in culture had been made. Beau Nash, a dandy and leader of fashion in 18th century Bath, had in his way done more than Brunel. What advantage is there in going 50, 100 or 10,000 miles an hour if you arrive stinking at the other end? Again and again, when holding ancient objects, he remarked on the intolerable stench. Death. Lethbridge developed a heart condition to the extent that he was unable to attend his mother's funeral in 1970. He eventually required 24-hour care and was transferred to Nuffield Hospital in Exeter, where he soon became delirious, before dying in his sleep on the 30th of September 1971, aged 70. An anonymously authored obituary in the Antiquaries Journal referred to the strength and honesty of Lethbridge's character as a man, and the singleness of purpose that united all his work as experimental testing of what he found by observation.